Hi, everyone. Welcome to Goat. Thanks so much for joining. I'm having fun. I don't know about you. I'm having a lot of fun learning Excel, and I hope you are too. I must say, Excel is actually difficult to learn. So today we are discussing how to reuse our VBA code the right way in Excel. There is a forthcoming video for the Access people because it works a little differently, but today we'll be talking about how to reuse our code for Excel, and then we're going to go over two code modules that may be very useful. Stay tuned. If you enjoy what you see, please consider subscribing. Like the video if you found it useful, and comment if you have any questions or input. Thanks so much. Now, the first two steps of the process are to create our shared code module file and then create a normal Excel macro-enabled file. So let's open Excel, blank workbook. We're immediately going to go to File, Save As, and then we're going to give it a name, something like Common VBA. And then I'm going to change the file type to an Excel add-in. Now, when I do that, you'll notice it tries to save this in my roaming profile. That's okay if you're on a corporate LAN or something. I'm just going to put it in my documents, and then I'm going to close the file. Now I'm going to reopen Excel, and then I see my common file here. Now you'll notice add-in files do not have worksheets because they're just for code. So let's go to Developer, Visual Basic. Now the first thing I want to do is rename this project file. I'm going to right-click, go to Project Properties, and I like to give it something that will show up last alphabetically in my project list. So Common Code. You can password protect it. I'm not going to do that for now. We're going to hit OK. And then before you leave, you want to create a module. It can be just a placeholder module with nothing there, and we're going to save that, close out. Now, if you don't save that module, Excel is very finicky, and I was having problems with getting the file to actually recognize the reference. So now let's create our normal Excel macro-enabled file. Again, we're going to go to blank workbook. We're going to go to File and Save As. I'm going to save this as a macro-enabled book. Give it some kind of name. Now I go to Developer, Visual Basic. Again, I'm going to create just a placeholder module. Now I'm going to go to Tools, References, Browse, change my filter to Excel files. There's my common module. Double-click it, hit OK, and just to be safe, I'm going to hit Save on both of these things. Now I have a reference, save the main file. So let's see if it works. We go to Excel. Let's open our main file. If we go to Developer, Visual Basic, now we have that referenced file. So any submodules that we code in here will be able to be used from any modules in our main project. If you do not create those placeholder modules before you try to link, for some reason, at least in this version of Excel, that reference does not show up automatically. So you have to create those placeholder modules. Now, before we get into the actual modules, if you're new to VBA, you need to realize what default values are when we're talking about functions and passed arguments. So here we have just this placeholder module that I've made, show default values. And the user has the option to pass a Boolean, a string, or a long. But what happens if they do not pass those values? What do they end up being? Well, here I have some simple debug print statements. And if I go to my immediate window and run this module, we'll see what they end up being. Oop, forgot my S. There we go. So the Boolean is false if it was not passed. The string is blank, which is really a double quotation mark, but it ends up, there's nothing there. And the long is 0. So that's important to remember as you start coding in VBA, that the default for a Boolean, string, or long is going to be false, nothing, or 0 respectively. And that is true if whether it's a passed argument or if you choose to code a function that happens to pass one of these data types, and we'll see that in the next example. So here's our first reusable function, WSExists. It's going to tell us whether a worksheet exists in the active workbook we're working in. I do public just to indicate that it is available anywhere in code, and it's going to return a Boolean. And remember from our last segment, by default, this function is going to return false unless otherwise set. So I put an error handler in as my first line of code, and you'll see why in a second. I then give myself a string variable. I could have easily said dim sfound as string. The $ at the end is just shorthand code for string. And then I attempt to set sfound equal to activeworkbook.worksheets, the past name, .name. Now, if that fails, it's going to jump to error handler, and remember, this is by default false. If it succeeds, I'm going to set this to true, and that's it. That's the end of this function. We'll see how that works later in code. Now, this next module is a lot more complex, but we're going to tackle it one piece at a time. This lets us make a new worksheet. It is actually a function, new WS, that returns a string value, and you'll see why in a moment. We pass it the desired name of the new worksheet name, and then we can optionally pass it flags to override it and to hide it as it's created. Now notice these are optional Booleans, which means by default they're false. So first I give myself a Boolean variable, worksheet found, and then I'm going to give myself a worksheet variable WS, and then an active name variable string. Then I set that active WS name variable equal to the active sheet's name. Then I'm going to initialize our new WS function, which is a string, to error. Next, I want to play the what if game. What if the user passes a desired sheet name of error? Well, I'm going to prevent them from doing that. So if the past name equals error, I'm going to say, give them a message box. Error is a restricted worksheet name and cannot be used. They only get an OK prompt, and then it exits this function. Next, I want to check if whether the name they passed me already exists in the workbook. So I'm going to use the function that we had earlier, WS exists. I'm going to make my Boolean up here, BWS found as a Boolean equal to what that function returns, which is either positive or negative, true or false. So does the P name that the user gave me for this function already exist? So now, what happens if the worksheet that they passed us already exists in the workbook? Well, it depends. Did they give us an overwrite option so that they don't care if it exists? So if the worksheet is found, then if not be overwrite, then we're going to ask them, if message box worksheet, give them the past name, already exists, overwrite. Now I'm using the shorthand to basically give them a yes, no, and default that answer to no. If it equals VB no, then exit function. So I ask them, hey, you just passed me a worksheet name that already exists, and you did not give me the overwrite flag to automatically overwrite it. So then I'm going to confirm. If they say no, then we're just going to exit this function. If they said, yes, I do want to overwrite, then we're going to disable display alerts. We're going to delete the past name of the worksheet, and then we're going to enable alerts again. Next, we're going to set our worksheet variable. Remember, since it's an object, we have to use set. Set worksheet equals to worksheets.add after worksheets, worksheets count. This basically adds a new worksheet at the very end of our workbook, and then we're going to make that worksheet name equal to the user's past name. Next, if the user passed the bhide function, then we're going to make that worksheet that we just created visible equal false, which hides the worksheet. Now remember, we also captured the active worksheet's name when this function first started, which was active worksheet name. If the past name they wanted for the new sheet is not equal to the active name, then we're going to activate that worksheet because they've chosen to hide this file. The reason we have to do this Boolean check is, let's say they're on sheet number 4 and they run this function and they pass it sheet 4 again. If we do not do this check and we attempt to activate that hidden sheet, we get an error message. Finally, we're going to set this function value equal to our worksheet name, and then we always like to clean up our code. Because we used set up here, we're going to set the worksheet equal to nothing. Now let's go back to our main file and see how these work. Open our Visual Basic Editor, and I'm going to set these side by side so that we can see what's happening. Now you want to make sure that when you start coding, you're in your main file project, not your common code project, so we can close these out if we wish. We can go to this module here. Here's our placeholder sub. We don't need that anymore because now we're going to make some real subs. Public sub test sheet. Now notice in this file, I've given myself 3 test sheets to work with. Again, I would not test this code on an active file until you're sure you know how to run it, but these are 3 blank sheets. So let's see how this works. Now then, I'm in my sub for my main file. I've given myself SWS as just a string variable. Now, again, we have to remember that when we made the function for new worksheet, it's going to return a string. So we're going to have to set a variable SWS equals new WS new worksheet. Sorry. Now look, it gives me the options that I have from that module. So what name of worksheet do I require? Let's test that with sheet 3, comma. Now these are optional because they're in brackets. So what if I pass this and I do not overwrite? What's going to happen? I'm going to save this module and then I'm going to run it here at the bottom, test sheet. Oh, yes, I had an error. It's SWS. There we go. Now let's try this. It's going to give me the warning, worksheet 3 already exists, overwrite. If I hit no, this worksheet stays around. And actually, let's type something in here just to know that this was overwritten. There we have it. Now what happens if I type test sheet again? I'm passing this sheet 3. Overwrite, yes. Now sheet 3 is overwritten, and by default, Excel, when you make a new worksheet, that becomes the activated worksheet. What happens if I don't want sheet 3 to be activated, or I want it hidden when I create it? So now let's do this. Matter of fact, we can actually run this function right from here. So if I debug.print new worksheet, here we go, sheet 3. This time I'm going to pass it overwrite true, and I'm going to pass it hide true. What do you think is going to happen? It instantly made a worksheet 3 that is now hidden, and I'm still on my sheet 1 over here. Very useful. Now let me give you a little hint. Instead of debug.print, in the immediate you can do question mark. What if I put false here? Actually, let's back up a little bit. Overwrite false, but hide true. So now I'm going to be prompted on whether I want that new sheet, but it's still going to hide it if true. Worksheet 3 exists, overwrite yes, but now it's hidden. So you're probably asking yourself, well, why would we want to use these functions? Well, I personally, when I start to code more of these things, I'm going to use that hidden worksheet as multiple tables to save references from other pieces of the worksheet or code that I've had to write. In Access, I can do that just with a table, and I don't have to kind of go through this thing. Here, I'm kind of doing the same thing, but I'm hiding it from the end user. I don't want them to know that I just created a worksheet that has some temporary data on it. So I'm going to make that worksheet hidden, usually, but you'll see that in future episodes. Again, if this was useful, thanks so much for joining. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications when I publish new things. Have a great day. God bless you. Thank you.